there aren't even millions of people in the ecosystem yet. So you have to build slowly and kind of do that, create really strong and sturdy base that you can then build off of pretty quickly once you get that down. And obviously, because of the beauty of the tech, it can be scaled very easily. Again, you just need to have like that, the right footing in place. Your Googles, Apples, and Facebooks, right? Like the top, and Amazons, right? Five biggest companies in the world. What happens when you start to kind of democratize that data and allow the user to control it? I think it becomes really cool.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to a really special edition of Brand Next Podcast. I have some huge news, and that is that we've got GMoney on the show today. If you don't know GMoney, he is one of the true pioneers of this space, first in the crypto scene, then in the NFT scene. But realistically, what's got me so excited about what he's doing is fashion company 90cc, where he is connecting tokens with physical product and really pioneering what the future of kind of digital, real world experience, interaction, how these things are going to play together. He is at the forefront of that, and we've got him here today. Wrote an article about his iteration 2 drop at the end of last year, and on the back of that, here we are. Everyone, welcome GMoney. Thank you very much, and let's get on with it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Brand Next Podcast. We are joined today by none other than GMoney. G, you are probably one of the true OGs of Web3 crypto scene. There's probably 100 questions I could ask you about your background, but we have a limited time, so I'm going to try to stay focused. And what that means is trying to stick to fashion brand that you've put together, 90cc. Before kind of diving into my questions, though, I've probably got some audience who might not know who you are. So it would be great if you could do a little bit of an introduction of yourself and a little bit of an introduction to 90cc and what you're trying to build.
Sure. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be on. A little bit about myself. I'm an NFT collector, investor, and all-around NFT advocate. I'm most famous for buying my Cryptopunk ape, which I wrote a thread on a little over 2 years ago on why I purchased it. Since then, I did a collaboration with Adidas on their entry into the NFT space. And after that, I launched 90cc, which is a crypto-native luxury lifestyle brand. And those are the things that I'm focusing the majority of my time on these days.
Fantastic. And I wrote, without speaking to you, I wrote an article in my newsletter last year about kind of some of the work that you were doing at 90cc. What I wrote about was something which I called kind of proof of influence. And that was focused on how you were using POAPs to connect product, but not just to prove authenticity of the product, but to start to prove engagement between people who are wearing your clothing and looking at that. And it was really interesting to me, and it hinted at what I thought a really interesting future for influencer marketing could be. But I'd love to kind of understand, what's your vision for tokenizing products and how those relationships can work?
Yeah, so when I started 90cc, there were three things that I wanted to solve for. First was I wanted to create an aesthetic that I wanted to wear, right? And so that was basically aesthetically, that I think that was kind of like the easy part. Easy, it's still obviously super hard in terms of design and making sure I create something that, one, resonates with me, but then also resonates with the community. Two was verifying that scarcity, right? So if I buy something, I want to know how many of them exist, right? Whether it's a handbag, a pair of sneakers, watches, whatever it is, I'd like to know if this is one of X. And then three, and this is the part that I think the first person to really pick up on publicly was, how does that community building start to work IRL? And that to me is the most compelling part, because these are interactions that currently happen already that don't get recorded in any way, shape, or form, right? So it's like we kind of see that already on like an Instagram or a Twitter or whatever. People have like these massive followings, but you don't know, one, how many of those are real, how many of those are real connections, right? And what does that look like over time? And I think that this was kind of one of those things that was simply born out of, one, my need for it, because over the prior 2 years, I would go around and I would give people POAPs for meeting me, right? So it basically was, I would tell them, this is basically an on-chain autograph that you met me, right? And people would collect those, and that formed the basis for my social graph of, how Admit One was actually put out into the wild. And so I was like, well, it would be pretty cool if I empowered, members of my community to go out and build their own social graphs. and do their own things and empower them to do the things that they want to do. And so I was like, this would be pretty cool. And I thought it would be cool. I wasn't sure if other people would find it as compelling as I did. And Art Basel in Miami was really the first time we put that to the test. And, over the course of those 4 or 5 days, we gave out 5,000 POAPs through that event. And so that told me that people were really interested in it. People were meeting each other. People were forming real connections IRL. And now it was kind of memorialized on the blockchain, right? And so to me, when I think about what does this mean going forward, right? All of a sudden you start saying, okay, well, if I have a wallet that is collected about 40 POAPs in person, chances are that that wallet is associated with a real human being, right? And so then what are the potential use cases and the unlocks that start to happen from that? And that to me is, I think, the most compelling part out of all of this is creating this ecosystem of people connecting IRL. And what does that mean when that starts to scale? Because you're giving them the opportunity to connect and bring those connections back online where they probably spend, 70+% of their time.
I think it's hugely powerful. I look at the connections that I have, and when you get an endorsement for a product from someone you know, from a friend, when you sit there and see something on Instagram, yeah, you might think it's cool and you might even go buy it, but it's not the compelling kind of personal recommendation of sitting down with someone and having them endorse that brand one to one. And those, unlike, as you say, the kind of Instagram endorsements, those are completely unrecorded. So I think it was a huge kind of eye opening for me to see what you're doing. It also looked at kind of some of the other things that, other people were kind of tokenizing for proof of authenticity. But it was the fact that you said three things. It was that third thing that kind of pushed it and made it something that was really new. I guess my question then, as an extension to that, is when you think about kind of that, do you think about what a traditional influencer community would look like versus what you're doing? Do you think about, like, now you've got 5,000 people who got POAPs at Art Basel. How do you engage? How are you thinking about engaging that kind of broader audience that might be one step removed from the product?
Yep. So, I mean, I think I have ideas of how I think that works, right? Because at that point, if you were to take a look at this as a sales funnel, right? Like that's like top of funnel, right? And so it's like, how do you bring those people into the top of funnel and then start bringing them down that process and really getting them engaged in the ecosystem? So I have ideas. I don't know if any of them are really concrete yet, but I'm like, all right, maybe this works, maybe it doesn't. But I think a lot of it starts with first, how do you create a community and, a community for people to kind of find themselves out in the real world and create a desire, like a mimetic desire for people to want to be part of that community. And then once you can get the foundational layer to that, then I think that funnel starts to become much easier to navigate. So for me, like, this is exactly why I started Admit One with only 1,000 members, right? Is because I wanted to have this small community where we can test a little bit and figure this out and make sure that it works before we start to try to scale it. Because I think what happens a lot in crypto is people try to scale a little bit too fast. And, they're like, they see the numbers and like, oh yeah, like let's scale this up to millions of people when there aren't even millions of people in the ecosystem yet. So you have to build slowly and kind of do that, create really strong and sturdy base that you can then build off of pretty quickly once you get that down. And obviously, because of the beauty of the tech, it can be scaled very easily. Again, you just need to have like the right footing in place.
Yeah, but as you say, you're building that community already, and that community is going to be an easy one to engage because you can sit there and see not just what tokens they have from you, but potentially all the other tokens to, as you say, is it a real person who's sitting at the end of this? How active are they? You can start to validate it, a huge amount of that through the data that's going to be purely visible on chain. In that sense, it starts to do what marketers have never been able to do, which is measure trust, which to me is a super exciting and interesting thing because nobody's been able to measure trust. We can measure all kinds of things, but and maybe this isn't quite measuring trust. It's getting pretty close. Do you think when you look at this and you've seen other brands, you've seen kind of Nike and Artifact start to look at how they're tokenizing products, you've seen other brands start to look at things, you've seen also brands like Hermes win their suit about Meta Birkins recently. Do you think that it's inevitable that more brands start to move down this path? How do you look at this? I mean, I know you're early days, but I kind of look at you as the pioneer here. I'm curious how you think this matures.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think everybody will be utilizing this technology within the next decade for sure. And it'll be varying rates of adoption. And, some people want it for the community building. Some people are going to want it for the proof of authenticity. I think there's going to be a lot of different use cases for the tech, the same way that there's a lot of different use cases for everything, right? Whether it's an ID card or a t-shirt, right? Like there are certain shirts you wear to go out and certain shirts you wear to go to the gym and shirts you wear to sleep. And those don't necessarily all overlap. And I think the same thing is going to happen with use cases for the tech. So I'm super excited about it. For me, I've just been trying to find use cases that I find compelling, that I think might be the best.
I think that there's probably more use cases than you can imagine. The interesting thing to me about the tech is that on top of that, other people are going to be able to build into it. As you think about that community, do you think about other people tapping into your community or tapping into other people's communities where you see an overlap or where you see kind of those kind of positive interests?
Oh, for sure. I think obviously one of the most compelling things of blockchain, right, is this transparent layer of it. So I think when I look into the future, something that I find really compelling, and it's also, I think, another, let's say, benefit of being part of the community is, what does that mean if you have a high reputation, let's put it in quotes, reputation score within the community, right? Where let's say you're an active member of the community, you're trusted, you participate and all these things. What does that mean? You can then export that reputation to another community so that, there's a lot of stuff around creator royalties and stuff like that. I think we're going to quickly move into a world where you'll be able to mint something based on reputation, right? So it's like if you bypass royalties, then guess what? You probably won't get on the next Tyler Hobbs drop. But if you do pay your royalties, then you have a higher likelihood of getting on the Tyler Hobbs drop. And I think that especially for things that are in high demand, that will end up happening, right? Like where if it's something that there's not enough demand, then obviously those will be open to everybody. But those high demand drops, I think, will be curated, and it'll be curated to the best buyers, right? It won't necessarily be curated to the traders. And I think that that's probably this world that we're headed towards, where it becomes more valuable to build up your reputation within this ecosystem or within any ecosystem, because then that can be exported to another ecosystem for your benefit, right?
It's really interesting because that already if you look at really high value products like buying a Porsche, you want a GT3, you don't get one unless you've already bought a couple other, like they look at your reputation, but it's the microcosm of reputation. It's only Porsche looking at what you've done with Porsche, as you say. This is all of a sudden reputation that can export. That's a super interesting way of actually looking at it.
Yeah, and like to your point is, the same thing happens at, Ferrari, Lamborghini, insert any high-end watch company here, where if you do buy it and then you flip it, you're not getting another piece directly from the manufacturer, right? You can only buy on secondary after that, right? So it becomes super interesting. And that's why it's funny, because sometimes people say, oh, this doesn't work. It does work. It already exists. A lot of these manufacturers in the real world already curate their buyers and only go for the top-notch buyers. But that can only happen when there's a product that has more demand than there is supply.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, but it still allows, if you think about it from a Nike perspective, right? Nike will drop a new sneaker. There will be more demand than there is supply, and yet they don't necessarily know who should get them. You just see lines around the block. All of a sudden, it puts it into a position where they can have that direct relationship. That's super exciting because it puts the power of doing that into the hands of brands unlike Porsche, unlike Lamborghini, the power of brands who are a little smaller. It starts to open whole new business avenues. Wow. Cool. Okay. You've got me thinking about something different already. So I like this.
What are you thinking about?
I'm just thinking about how, like, these are all of a sudden new opportunities for middle brands to start looking at how do they go and create. You'll always see the kind of limited edition, whether it's H&M, whether it's but streetwear brands will try to do what's their limited edition collection. But now if they can actually get to know who that community is and start to look at who are the people who are their biggest fans or are the biggest fans of things that they think matter to that particular product, they can curate that audience set in a much more interesting way rather than just sell out. Like, how fast can we sell out? They're going to sell out either way. But that kind of curation becomes hugely interesting. And I just kind of want to hear a little bit about some of the other things you've done. You sat there, you put out You know, you said we talked about Art Basel. You got 5,000 POAPs out there. You put together leaderboards. So you've obviously had huge response from the community of just kind of looking at how they can be playful, how they can share these POAPs. What's the kind of feedback? What do you do on the leaderboard for people who aren't part of the community? Like, where do you wind up if you wind up top of the leaderboard?
Yep. So for the World Connect event that we just ran a few weeks ago at NFT Paris and ETH Denver, the person we had, simultaneous leaderboards, right? So we gamified the experience of meeting people wearing the shirt IRL, so that if you met somebody wearing a 90cc shirt, you can collect a NFT from that shirt. And the person that distributed the most POAPs slash NFTs over the course of that time won a free shirt. And the person that collected, the person that distributed the most and the person that collected the most, each won a shirt. And we actually made that announcement yesterday of the winners. And the feedback has been really cool because there have been members of the community that are like, that have said, oh, I'm an introvert. I don't go out there and meet that many people. But because they're wearing the shirt, they had people come up to them and scan their shirt and they made connections, right? And they made friends and they made, and I think ultimately for me, one of the most important elements of, the human experience is being able to connect with people and find like-minded individuals. And I think COVID really put us in, our little boxes at home. And I think as a society, we really yearned for that connection. And I do think that now that the world's opening back up, people want to find their tribe in the real world. And I think that this is kind of a way to help people find like-minded individuals out in the real world and connect with them, right? Because it's sometimes, how often have you seen somebody wearing something you like and you're like, oh, I really like your shirt. And then it ends there, right? It's like you say, oh, thank you. And then that's it. And you move on. But, what happens if all of a sudden, you start talking and it's like, oh, wait, like I'm also into NFTs. Like you like this. Oh, I'm also into generative art. Oh, what's your favorite PFP project? And it allows people to connect in the real world. And that to me is one of the foundations of what I'm trying to build with 90cc is how do I empower people to find like-minded individuals that hopefully leads to something really cool. And I can only talk from previous experience where I ran a POAP treasure hunt NFT, a Bitcoin Miami back in 2021. And these two people ended up going to the same location to collect a POAP and they ended up forming a venture fund together. They didn't know each other before then. And now, they're business partners. And it's like, how can I help empower people at scale like that to get people to interact and to connect, whether as a friend, as, a romantic relationship or a business relationship, whatever it is, how can I help foster that connection? And that to me is stuff that I find really compelling.
That is an awesome story. I think about tech in a similar way. I talk to people right now about, everyone's having conversations about AI, and I talk about the reason why people are interested in it is not because it's doing something new that people couldn't do. It's actually because now you can interact with a machine like a human. And in actual fact, good tech just allows us to be more human. And what I love about blockchain is it's allowing us to kind of carry digital sides into the more human world, not just stare at your phone screen as you walk around, but actually have digital, a wallet aware experience in a real world, as you say, and start to, I think great tech is going to be the things that allow us to be more human rather than things that push us into just thinking about the technology. I love that mission and I love the story about getting people to be part of a venture fund. That's amazing.
Yeah, no, it's been really cool. And we have an activation coming up at NFT NYC starting on April 12th, where we're doing a pop up and then there's going to be a treasure hunt linked to that. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And again, like I go into a lot of these events optimistically nervous, right? Because I know my grand plan that we're trying to execute on. And I'm hoping that other people find it as compelling as I do, right? And, because also part of it too is not always telling people exactly what the grand plan is and kind of leaking it out over time, which is, again, one of the reasons I was really interested to have this conversation was because you were the first person to publicly get it, right? And that article that you wrote, I was like, yeah, I'm like, he knows exactly what I'm trying to do here. Because I think, and to your point is, this is like one of the missing elements, right? In terms of when you think about it from like a biz dev point of view and marketing, right? Like these connections that happen in real life, the only people that really have access to possibly inferring that data is, your Googles, Apples, and Facebooks, right? Like the top, and Amazons, right? Five biggest companies in the world. What happens when you start to kind of democratize that data and allow the user to control it? I think it becomes really cool.
I think it becomes incredibly powerful. You put that you put that data into the hands of small business, and all of a sudden you start to see a whole raft of innovation that, I mean, we tend to think that the best ideas come from the biggest companies, but we don't even know what's possible when we put this in the hands of small business. So I think it's super exciting to see what's there. You talked a little bit about, heading off to NFT Paris. You're traveling a lot. I'm curious, we talk about your project. Do you see any projects outside that you sit there and go, oh shit, they did that? Like, what's inspiring you these days?
I mean, I feel like I get that. I get those moments a lot for like different parts, right? For different things that different people are doing. For me, the things that I find the most interesting are one, obviously people that are building cool tech, but more importantly is how are people getting people to adopt that tech? And part of the reason why I wanted to start 90cc was I felt like nobody was really building on the application layer. So people were building a lot of cool technology that definitely could become the foundations of the future, but nobody was utilizing it, right? So for me, with 90cc, I was like, all right, well, I don't want to vertically integrate everything and become like, your one-stop shop for all these solutions. I'm going to partner with people that I think are best in class in the industry and utilize their solutions in my solution, right? And kind of putting the puzzle pieces together. And I'll see a lot of, I think pretty much most projects in the space, I think are doing something revolutionary. I think the question is whether they can execute it or not. And the question is whether they can find product market fit. So sometimes, even though I see something that is really cool, it might take a while to find product market fit, right? I'll take an example, I think, is AI art, right? Like I remember looking into AI art last year, with Botto and with Braindrops, and I made the mistake of kind of sleeping on them. And I thought I had time. I was like, oh yeah, like I'll have some time to get in on these. And obviously with the rise of all things AI, those things are really starting to catch a lot of attention now. But you could have gotten in there for pennies on what they're trading right now. And but these are movements that I remember seeing the mechanic. I'm like, oh, I think that could be cool. I'm just not really interested in enough yet, right? But I think just finding those different projects that are doing cool things, right? So I'm sure there's other people doing really interesting and compelling stuff with real world use cases that I haven't even thought of yet. And I'm like, when I see them, I'll be like, oh, that's really cool. How do we implement that into what we're doing, right?
Yeah, I've noticed that you do a lot of that. So I'll just kind of throw a few things out there. And like I love the fact that you're working with 4K, with IYK, with those guys because, that, like you say, they're building great stuff. So I think that's amazing. And the fact you're then translating that, what I love is I've been in a marketing business and a marketing kind of role for the better part of my professional career. But what I love is actually turning things into experiences. And what I love is that you're figuring out how to take this tech and turn it into an everyday experience where people can actually interact and where that can work. I think it's a fantastic thing. I'm really interested to see how other brands start to move in that direction and start to think, how do we actually use these technologies not just to build a one-off, but actually to create experiences that are lasting. And I guess my question for you is, for people who are looking at that, what advice would you give to a big brand? You've worked with a few of them. What advice would you give to a big brand who's looking at this space and going, how do we get involved and how do we make sure that we're successful?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of things. One is you need buy-in from the top. The one thing that I've really seen time and time again is that the more buy-in from the top, the more holistic your approach, the higher probability that you'll be successful. So that I think that's one is, if you can get buy-in from the CEO level, I think you'll start seeing things. And I think a great example of this is Starbucks, right? Where they have buy-in from the absolute top, and I think Starbucks is coming out of the gate doing really well because they understand the space, and they're not necessarily looking at it as a revenue generation opportunity or a marketing opportunity or customer rewards opportunity, right? It's like they're looking at it holistically and integrating a lot of different aspects of the plan, because I think ultimately the more comprehensive your solution, the better you're going to be long term. So that I think that that's one. And then two is working with the right partners and the right solution providers. And I've seen time and time again legacy companies coming into the space, either working with, let's say, maybe an agency that they've worked with in the past, or people that they know that say, oh, we can do this, but they aren't necessarily best in class. And then they have some sort of technical failures because they weren't working with the right people. I think that those are probably the two biggest things I see that brands can do to when they're entering in the space to up their odds, their probability of success.
I guess I'll ask kind of a two-part question here. And it's, I guess, one, are you looking to still partner with big brands? Is that something that 90cc is actually looking for? And I guess the second part is, are you willing to give us a hint of what's next for, I mean, I guess you talked a little bit about the treasure hunt you've got coming up, but are you willing to give us a hint about what else you've got coming up?
Yeah, for sure. I'm always interested in having discussions with big legacy brands. I'm always in conversations with, somebody interesting, which is really cool. A lot of times, one is, the lead time is really long. So, we could have something that is planned, that comes out next year that we're already in talks and figuring out. And two, with regards to what we have plans for NYC, we're doing a pop up on April 12th where more information should be coming out within the next few days. That's going to be iteration 3, which is a hat. And I'm really looking forward to it. I teased it a couple times on Twitter and Instagram already, and it should be fun. I'm really looking forward to it. And I think that combined with the scavenger hunt experience is going to be a lot of fun. I teased this already, but Snowfro has committed to giving an unminted squiggle as a potential prize, and I think that's pretty cool. So it's going to be fun.
I've been living in Asia for the past 10 years. I'll be in the US in April. And now I'm tempted to find my way to New York. You're definitely giving me a bit of FOMO. I'm feeling like I need to be there. I'll ask kind of two last questions that are totally random and have nothing to do with the past conversation. But A, and you can answer these in either order that you please. But number one, just I'd love your thoughts on what's going on with Silicon Valley Bank and how you feel about how that's impacting the space, etc. And two, while you were in Paris, where did you get the best croissant?
Okay, the best croissant I had, oh man, it was at Cyril something. I heard after I had eaten a croissant, there's this Cedric, last name starts with a G, Grole.
I think I follow the guy on Instagram, Pastry Chef. Yeah, I'll link to that.
Yeah, they look incredible and I want to go, but apparently they sell out in like 10 minutes or you have to order them in advance. So I think the next time I go to Paris, I'm going to check that place out. But I'll say for the most part, you can literally go to any like bakery, boulangerie, like on the corner and get an amazing croissant. And that is definitely not the case in the States. And, they're all buttery and delicious and amazing. And I'm like, wow. And there's always like a line. I'm like, I get it because these things are delicious. So I need to go back for more testing. But I can honestly say for the most part, croissants in Paris, you really can't go wrong pretty much anywhere you go. So that's to answer that. And then with Silicon Valley Bank, I think it's been really interesting. Obviously we're seeing the fallout of that start to happen now. And the Fed acting on Sunday night, basically bailing out all depositors. Now, I think, I can make a case for both sides of if I'm depositing money at a bank account, do I really need to be a forensic accountant, right? Like you can't really realistically think for people to be forensic accountants when they deposit their money at a bank and they're trying to build their own business. But, that's a lot of money that would have been sucked out of the system, which I think would have led to a real crisis. So I think what the Fed did was right. I think they basically implicitly guaranteed all bank deposits for all depositors going forward, because how could you bail out these banks but not, numbers 3, 4, through 100, right? You've set precedent that you have to bail out all deposits. And so I think that's, one is you have an implicit guarantee that the Fed's bailing stuff out. Two is, and the market has been reacting to this in the sense that I believe that I think Wednesday morning, there was a 75% expectation of a 50 bip hike going into the March meeting. And now I think today there's like a 50%, less than a 50% expectation of a 25 bip hike going into the meeting. So I think rate hike expectations have come in tremendously. I'm not ready to say that the rate hike cycle is over just yet, because I do think that if risk assets start really rallying from here, the Fed's probably going to have to do something at some point to kind of try to curb those animal spirits to keep some sort of credibility in terms of fighting inflation. But this kind of signals we're closer to the end than not, right? And so I think that's why you've seen Bitcoin and Ethereum really start to rally in the last 48 to 72 hours, is because people are starting to price in, all of a sudden the terminal rate is no longer above 5, but possibly below 4 at this point by September. that means we're pretty close to the height cycle being over. And once the height cycle is over, that means the easing cycle probably starts to begin.
Yeah, well, listen, look, I really appreciate that. You gave more of an answer than I was expecting. I really appreciate it. I love it. I can see the types of books that you read when you start talking about animal spirits too.
Yeah.
So I know where you're going. No, listen, I really appreciate your time. I think what you guys are doing, what you're building with 90cc is hugely exciting. And I look forward to seeing what comes next. Now I'm hoping to make it to New York and catch you and grab a POAP while I'm there. But if not, I'll grab you somewhere soon.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for everything and look forward to talking again in the future.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, everyone. That was GMoney. And first thing I want to say is while I asked him about his opinion on Silicon Valley Bank, none of what he said should be considered financial advice. That is his speculation, his opinions, his point of view, but do not act on that. Do not trade on that. This is just a conversation amongst friends, and it is not financial advice and shouldn't be taken that way. But what it was is a real demonstration of how this guy thinks, and everything in that conversation was. And I'm super excited for everything that he just shared with us, talking to us about how the physical world and the digital world are colliding, how tokens are going to unlock new experiences, and really what 9DCC is doing to start to show us the breadcrumbs, show us the trail of what's going to be possible. I'm super excited for a bunch of things that I know he's going to show us at NFT NYC in the near term, but realistically, my brain is overflowing with ideas of what I could do with the brands that I work with today. So super excited. I hope you are too. I hope everyone learned something. Thank you very much. And until next time, take care.